Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Hello, everyone. It's our first time back in a while, but my name's Hiran. I'm going to be facilitating today.
I'm Hanna.
My name is Meklit.
And I'm Maria Moit.
All right. So today we're going to be discussing the book, as a lot of people know, one of my all-time favorite books. I think maybe my favorite book, Elements, the Transfiguration of Elijah. This book was written by the author or the anonymous author, a priest of the Oriental Orthodox or the Oriental Church. Like I said, anonymous author. He has written a couple of other works as well, including a sequel to this book, and then like another sequel-ish, kind of like an expansion, and then three other books as well. I'm a big fan. I think all of his works are really, really well made and well done. And they're not all fiction, but they are all obviously spiritual. So let's start off with some of our initial reactions to the book. If anyone wants to start us off.
Okay, I guess I'll go. So for me, it was like it got me hooked like from the very first page. I was actually reading another spiritual book at the moment, and then I got the book because it was being very much hyped up and it was recommended in the Nisaha Gobay as well. But then when I opened the first page and I started casually reading just to check what my next read will be, I got hooked right away and I just paused my other book and had to get into reading this book. And I loved how it was very surprisingly casual and very relatable. And it's pretty much, I felt like I was reading like a normal, like, well, normal, but like a secular, like fiction book. And I almost forgot that it was a spiritual book. And then it just progressively grows more spiritual and takes you along the way. So I think that was my initial reaction. I was just surprisingly not as spiritual, but it was also the storytelling was so amazing that it pulls you right in.
Okay, I can go next since mine is a little bit more different, I would say. I think my very first time reading it, I wasn't very I feel like I related more to like the beginning part of the book more than I did like to the towards the second half of the book where I just like had no idea what was going on, so I don't know, it felt a little like foreign to me, I guess. Um versus like the few times that I've read it after that, especially this last time that I read it, just the sheer amount of stuff that I connected to and the advice that was in it just from reading and learning from the different characters and seeing my spiritual journey, my spiritual progress and transfiguration throughout these entire years of like me, trying to better myself in terms of my spiritual life. I feel like I was just like very immersed and very like seeing myself in the different characters and seeing how I could improve. So that was my um, not my initial reaction, I guess, but like after the first time that I read it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
oh,
sorry.
um,
I guess my initial reaction was I was a bit hesitant at first, to be completely honest with you, because I remember I read, I think the first two chapters, and I was like, okay, this was pitched to me as a spiritual book. It's not really there, like what's going on, Aynat Nagar. So like for me, I was hesitant at first, and it took me a while to like push through and like I would put it down and I'd be like, okay, maybe later, and like it took me a bit of time, but then when I got into it, I was like hooked. I was like, wow, like it really I felt like I was also transfigured along with Elijah. It's just such a beautiful story and it's very relatable. That's one of the beautiful parts about it. So yeah, that was my initial reaction.
yeah. I think maybe out of everyone here, I went in the most blind. Like I kind of bought, I think, this book and like three others that we've also covered on this podcast, like all together. When I first like joined like the Nisagawa and like the the book club, and I read First Beginning to Pray. It was really short, so I finished it, and then I was like, "Oh, I'll just read a couple chapters of this one on my bed." And I opened it, and I fully remember this day, like minute to minute. And I opened the book, started reading, and immediately I was captivated, like beyond. And I think it's also because it's the first time for me that I interacted with like more like engaging. Definitely first time I ever interacted with like fictional pieces of like spiritual literacy, or literature. And then also like the first time I've like it's the first time I'd see like this orthodoxy depicted in such a light and in such like a, I don't know, like a full person's journey instead of just like maybe like a theological study. And I always found it like incredibly fascinating. I finished the book day of, like that night. Took me a while, and I just went in like so blind that it just took me like aback, like really fast. Like I just did not expect any of it really. I think that's also why I love it so much. And one big thing about the book is that it's like structured like the Bible, this book, and then also its sequel. It kind of follows the structure of the Bible, as in like the titles of the chapters are titled like the chapters of the Bible, right? So it starts with Genesis, ends with Revelations, and it's honestly really beautiful. A lot of the book has like it's very poetic. Most of it is like poetry beyond just like the storytelling. It's always a deeper meaning to like everything in it, which is again a reflection of like the Bible, which is it's like kind of I guess kind of taken after or kind of like modeled after. Um, so one of the biggest themes of the book would definitely be like this journey of faith, right? Like this says, like it says, a transfiguration of Elijah, this turning this man, this person into from one thing to another, to honestly a whole other completely. And it starts from like innocence into doubts into honestly purity and innocence again. And it's like this like gradual journey of progression, and it models the honestly the Christian life and life of believer in general really really well. Does anyone want to touch on that real quick?
I think you should start us off with that, Hera. It's only fair.
Yeah, okay, I'll take it. Um, I think one of the biggest things with Elijah and like with the book and with the character, and I will say we're not going to be giving any spoilers in here. I think everyone should read the book, so it'll we will kind of stray away from like plot points, so I won't give away too much. But it literally follows him throughout his life, right? And it starts off in this place where he is, as all of us were, right, childlike, pure, like Christ says, like be like the children. And you can see it in his early life why the Lord would tell us to be like the children, because like this purity, this connection to the other world, to what's on the other side of the veil is so tight. And that's obviously how all children begin, but it's also like it's modeled so well and it's written so well that it reminds you of what exactly you had. It reminded me of what exactly I had back when I was like really young, and like how the pure hearts of children really allow them to see quite a lot more than we do. And then it's really relatable because especially as he goes into his teens, it's in like a Canadian setting, like it's set in Canada for like his childhood, and like it goes into his teens and it models like every person, like every teen who grows up, especially in like a foreign country, of the Orthodox faith, of like the Christian faith, really, who like goes through that period of like losing that innocence and entering this period of doubt, right? And especially hits this like I guess this like changing of Elijah's mindset from being so open and so pure and being so ready to receive like the mystical into like I guess doubt, and then also like viewing religion and orthodoxy and the church as like set of rules to be followed, which a lot of us fall into. I know I've fallen into it, and it's like I do this, and God will grant me this, and it's something that like you see all the time consistently within the book, and it's less about virtue and it's more about following the rules so that you can get what you want out of the system, essentially, like a lot of us do, treating God like an ATM machine. I give, you give, right? Um, and I always found that part where like I think that's one of like the most relatable things, and especially the fact that it's set in like this Orthodox setting. A lot of the time, I know within our faith, especially a lot of the youth, like me, like will take at some point will really view the church as like this like Pharisaic, like very strict, more about the rules than about spirituality, right? Rules and spirituality are placed at like these two separate ends, and you'll see it in the book as well. Elijah views spirituality as its own thing, and then the rules as their own thing, and it's something that we do a lot in this day as well. And I think it's really important, an important point that the book makes, that the spirituality and that the rules that the church enforces, you see it through his life when he starts to understand that they aren't like two separate entities, like separate of each other. They are synergistic. Like they work, the rules work to enforce and to build that spirituality in Elijah's life. And once he begins to like develop a fondness and for an understanding of why the rules, or I guess like the restrictions, as we say, of like the church and of like the faith are there, he begins to like grow a really deep love for them. And I think it's a part of honestly any Christian's journey, and I think it's like a really beautiful thing. And then he grows into a beautiful spiritual life. So I quite loved it. Does anyone want to add?
Yeah, okay. So I contemplated a lot with like what I'm gonna say for this part of the podcast because um I feel like just throughout the whole book, seeing Elijah and his transformation from when he was a little kid to how he was losing his innocence, there was a lot of parallel with my life specifically, and I think a lot of people, especially the youth. Um, for example, there was one part of the book where he was it was talking about like how we lose our innocence from like small Me Too's, for example, and how those small little like complacent I guess agreements that we make with non-spiritual experiences that we have as we grow up, we start to lose our innocence. And I felt like I related a lot to that because I feel like that's where it all starts, right? Like, as when we're little, we experience different things at school, just everywhere around us that we're like, okay, but I have to like kind of fit in, or like, there that feeling of like loneliness, or I don't know how to describe, but that feeling of like I want to belong in this space makes you like want to be complacent in things. And even when they're small, in the moment they seem small, those things grow to like where you recognize like how far you've come at a certain point, and you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm so far from the pureness that I started. And the book even talks about how like once you lose that innocence, like it's not an easy thing that to be like, to just come back to it and have it again. So I felt that part was like like very, very relatable. And then as you're following Elijah through his journey and through his transfiguration, there was like multiple parts where like you can see the parallel like difference between, okay, he lost his innocence here, and then he was acting like this in here, and like he was doing this here. And then as you go towards like the end of the book, the second part of the book, where he was like changing as he was discovering God again. I have like multiple examples of this, but I'm gonna try to give like at least one example without giving away any like storyline. So, for example, in one part of the book, it was talking about like basically he was going on a walk with this other character, and he meets one of her uh homeless friends, and he happened to be homeless, and she was like running towards him and like hugging him, and he was saying like he was like very surprised, like he like he because he looked upon like uh I think the book said like he looked upon them as like leeches of society, and like that was his perception of um people that were unfortunate. And then towards the end, he makes like a complete turn where um he basically feels the suffering of the world, and he has that compassion for people and all of that. And like just seeing that transformation of Elijah, I felt like um you could see like the work that he's been doing and the work that God and the Spirit has been doing through his life. So it was very like I feel like insightful to look at his journey through there, and like the parallel and seeing like what I could be doing um with my spiritual life.
I don't know, is there anything you want to add?
No, I think they covered this part very beautifully.
Right. So
Yeah.
I think it's definitely hugely relatable, like you said, Mekhi, when it comes to like the transformation, and he inspires a lot through action or through like the action, fictional action that we can see him take, and it inspires the reader's faith a lot as well. And then it has obviously this huge theme of like Coptic, like spirituality and like the identity and obviously all the aspects of the church, and it draws on a lot of that, and a lot of the beauty in the book comes from that and comes from what it draws on. So Marmite, you want to touch up on it?
Yeah, sure. So I think this is like single-handedly the thing that makes it very relatable to most people, most youth, especially like the diaspora, like all over the Western world. Even though like it's written from like point of view of like the Coptic tradition, I think like us as Ethiopian Orthodox Christians also very much resonate with the dilemmas these characters face, the internal battles they have, them trying to fit in these two worlds that seem extreme, like there's school and there's liberalism and there's the American culture or the like Western culture in general. And then there's church, which is very traditional, very, how would you say, like very kind of restrictive if most teens would say it's a bit restrictive or like traditional, old school. So I feel like it pulls people to different places, and I think seeing the characters, especially the main character Elijah's journey as he tries to like maneuver these different two extremes of his life, like that's where he kind of breaks, like where like as a child he had no problem confirming to the rights of the church, because he openly was receiving it, and he was childlike. He didn't question. He just had a like a faith. He just had a faith. But then the more he grows and the more he sees that other people at school aren't the same people, and they're not like binded with the same obligations that he has, that kind of brings him to a certain friction where he starts to ask questions, and not from a place of wanting to understand, but from a place of like just questioning and like doubting and being too scientific or Western or stuff like that. So we definitely, I mean, most people in the youth I would say at one point in their lives, especially people raised in like Western traditions, definitely face these challenges. And I think they would find Elijah very relatable. And also, but also on the other side, there are also other characters who came from their home country, who were raised in the rites and the church and the culture, and we see them trying to find their place in this new Western Western society as well. So if you're also someone like me who came from your home country, and you're like raised in that culture and in that tradition, in that warmth, in that chaos, that beautiful chaos, and then you come to a Western society and you face different things. It's also a book for you if you're also facing that, and you also see some other characters going the different direction, coming from the more traditional society and trying to blend in with the Western society, but also trying hard not to lose their identity and their faith as they try to blend into the new society they're brought into. So I feel like it works for both kinds of people, and I found it very relatable for both of the reasons. And seeing the characters maneuver through these was very insightful for me, and I think most people will find it insightful as well.
I think absolutely, like a lot of the I guess like the way that the faith is portrayed is something that I think is super super important to have, especially now, especially since the population of Ethiopian Orthodox Christians and Oriental Christians as a whole, it's like booming in like foreign countries, countries outside of like just I guess where the typical home countries of these like rights of orthodoxy. Um, and I think the two things in this book that when it comes to like identity and like spirituality that like really hit me was one when it's talking about like the Coptic faith and the church and the understanding of the church of like everything spiritual. It is done so beautiful and written so beautifully that it makes you want to go and see, right? It makes you want to go participate in it. And I think books that I guess push you to participate more, to see the beauty in the church more, are incredibly important, especially to have for like the youth like us, right? And then it also doesn't like for because there are other characters that aren't Coptic or that aren't like Egyptian or even Orthodox at all, and it does a really really beautiful job of asserting the truth and the beauty of Orthodoxy without, I guess, like not like disrespecting or even like demonizing other Christian rights or like others in general. It does such a beautiful job of like portraying these characters not as like like stereotypes but as like actual people. And I think that's one of the reasons why it has such a great pull. And one of my other like favorite things about this book and how it shows spirituality is the way that it discusses or the way that it writes and narrates the saints, right? And how it really beautifully portrays like the relationship between like the church triumphant and the church militant and like how connected and close they are and they should be. And I think it does a really beautiful job of like within every little moment of the book, every win, every loss, every up and down, there is always all of heaven, and a specific member of heaven in heaven who is rooting for Elijah, who is there for Elijah. There's always someone for him to turn to, a like a fellow member of the body of Christ who has finished their fight, who has finished their race, and is still viable for him to ask for help, to talk to find comfort in at any time. And I think it does this like really well where it doesn't like necessarily have them literally speak back to him, right? Like when if we were to pray to the saints, they don't literally go, you know what I mean? A lot of the time we're not going to hear that when most of us are not at the spiritual level to do so to hear that. But he gets like these responses, and the fact that heaven is responding and that these saints are responding is never it's never like passed upon. It is always addressed and it's always like I guess like reinforced that heaven is listening and that these saints are listening and that they care, right? That heaven does care. That those who have won their fight don't just well, I'm done. So I no longer care about, Elijah and his struggles with, God knows what, but rather that they still care even more so than they did while they were on earth for Elijah, right? And for all of the church as a whole. And I think that's does a beautiful job of portraying the things that we believe about saints and portraying like the way our relationship with the saints should be, in a way that's not necessarily like I guess not like canonical or like kind of like like study like this the saints are and this is what we believe dogmatically and this is our canon. Instead of it like being like that, it's just like a beautiful in action portrayal of how we should view the saints as our brothers and sisters, how we should revere them the same, right? And how they love us and how we should love them. And I think it's one of my favorite things about the book. Anything we want to add? If not, I know this is something Hanna's hot, like dying to talk about. With how nature, obviously the name of the book is Elementals, right? It goes through, four different parts of the book: earth, water, fire, and wind, and it pulls upon nature a lot, like a lot. And honestly, a lot of our general theological texts draw upon nature a lot. Obviously, it is a part of God's good and great creation. So it's always right to do so. And I'm going to give it away to Hanna because I know she's ready. I know she's ready to dissect this.
Yeah, no, I've been waiting. Okay, I think this is one of, if not my favorite theme of the entire book. Um, just like so in the beginning it kind of hints upon how Elijah has all kind of with his innocence has been able to see the sacredness of nature, and then as he like is questioning and doubting and growing and finding his way to deepen his faith, that aspect kind of falters and he starts seeing it as kind of just something that he can use in his everyday life or like something he passes by. And then as he gets deeper into his spirituality, he becomes more and more connected to nature. Like the first part of the this book, specifically of volume one, is called Earth because it's essentially his journey of grounding himself and becoming just the dirt, the firmament that God created, understanding like that, even in and of itself, is sacred because it's created by Him, and how all of nature is essentially it comes back to the root, right? The root being God because He created all things. And the beauty of that is in this process of Him becoming earth, he it's like a message for understanding your place in God's will and God's plan in a way. And I just love how it draws so many metaphors and similes and just makes it so much more poetic by incorporating the aspect of nature because it's such a beautiful and important aspect of God's grand design that we, with our hustle and bustle and everything that we have going on in our lives, we tend to disconnect from or we tend to forget about. And, just one of the things that, at least for me, like I've always loved being in nature. It's always grounded me, and I know that's where I find peace. And I see that in this novel too. And I loved seeing like I loved this connection and watching his journey and becoming a part of nature in a way almost. And he really just brings himself to be understand what it means to be creation. And I want to share my favorite quote, but I'm gonna wait for that part of the podcast because it's just so good and I always come back to it and like really grounds me. So, but yeah.
So glad. So glad you're able to put that out there. Um, who else wants to add a little bit more about the
I
nature
can talk a
aspect?
little bit about this. So this was also one of my favorite themes of the whole book, I would say. I think first starting with Elijah's like change in perspective of from like when he was a kid with like his different experiences with like hugging trees and talking to caterpillars and things like that. Like he was very interactive with the nature around him to um later in life finding himself as I think as the book put it um very like I'm on the receiving end of like oh my God like I have to like it's mine, this is mine, like the book also mentioned like Pac-Man like wanting to just consume everything around him, right? Like um and then that change, and then later on in the book he also goes back to like especially with themes of like him becoming earth, um like realizing that everything is God's creation. The I mean the Bible talks about like how even if we cease to praise God, like um other creations around us would do that, right? Like everything is God's creations that deserves our respect and our gratitude. And I think one of my favorite themes revolving like him becoming earth was the gratitude part, where he was just like it was talking about like how earth receives, right? Earth receives everything, and that's with gratitude. So we have to receive everything with gratitude. So watching him go from like everything's mine, I have to consume this, I have to consume, and everything is for my consumption, my pleasure, to I should be grateful for this and I should be grateful for that, and his journey to becoming earth. I think it also reminded me of another book that I was reading actually recently called All That I Have Is Yours by Pope Kyrillos. And it's the book in the beginning talked about like how like one of the biggest things we struggle with is like receiving God's love, like it's receiving. But I think as humans in general, we've like twisted the idea of like receiving from to like consumption and like things that bring us pleasure and only us, like it's a more selfish idea around it versus like receiving in terms of like gratitude and being able to receive God's love and everything around us and being able to give it back. So I thought that was interesting.
I also want to add a little bit with nature. First thing I want to say is like how I loved how in the book it's very like y'all mentioned, it's very intentional in adding the like natural elements and the characters' relationships with nature, especially in response to their spiritual stature. Like when you are more spiritual, you're more attuned to nature, as like Maklita mentioned, as opposed to when we become less spiritual, we see everything as there for us to consume. And I also love how like the character Elijah, like just like Adam used to name the the trees and the plants and like the nature around him, and also other one of the other characters called Esther as well had these monologues, like internal conversations with the flowers, and how she treated them as though like they're individual persons almost like. And I loved how us returning to our childlike self will return us to almost the state of Adam before the fall. And I love how there's always a part of the book where it says like all of creation waits for this moment where son of Adam becomes the son of God, the son of God, and everything is like a two. How it brought it back to that, and it's not necessarily about us hugging trees or smelling the flowers or anything like that. It's putting it from a place of it's a direct reflection of our spiritual stature and our relationship with God, which determines our relationship with nature itself. And another thing I loved about it is how like Heiran mentioned, the book is called Elements, and it basically talks about the different four elements of like earth, water, fire, and wind. And I love that part because like even in Sunday school, we used to learn that like us as humans, we're made up of like the four elements of the earth, of the flesh, and three elements of like the spirit. And I loved this basically was a very good translation of what that really means. Like it means that we have it in us, like because we're built of these elements, we have it in us like to be as humble and receiving as like the earth, because like the word humility literally comes from like the Latin word for soil or for earth, right? So we have it in us. We're built like the earth to be receiving of good and bad, um, without like to without any just receiving both the good and the bad, and being humble towards it. And we also have it in us to be like sacrificial and selfless like the water, pure like water. And we have it in us to like be like spirit born like the wind. Like there's a reference of the wind being related to the Holy Spirit, like when, say, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ talks to Nicodemus in John 4, he refers to the Spirit as the wind. So we also have it in us to be spirit born like the wind, and we also have it in us to like be full of love that is like whole and consuming like a fire in us. So the more we attain like attune to our own natures. Like even nature itself is there to teach us how to be true sons of God. So I loved how it made it a point to put us along the journey of Elijah learning to be like a human from nature, basically. So I love that part.
I'm so glad you brought up specifically that quote. I know we're going to talk about favorite quotes later, and I don't really have one, but that's a quote I think I remember at least once a week. Just simply because obviously a lot of the book is all of the book is spiritual, but especially even though I'm not the biggest like I guess nature is not my favorite theme of the book. I will say I love nature so much, but it's not like my favorite theme of the book. But I think that quote specifically and how his interactions change with nature it's so beautiful and it ties back so well into how like the sons of Adam and how this entire book is how is Elijah turning going back to how he was originally, right? The same way Adam went back to how he was originally. It's Elijah being restored, the same way Adam was restored, right? The same way all of humanity is restored through Christ's like salvational work, right? And I think like it's just like a huge theme of the book, and I think it's incredibly beautiful. And I think it's also a really good segue into the characterization of Elijah throughout the book. Um, and does anyone want to start us off with this one? Because I have a lot to say. No? All right, cool. Great. Thank you guys. Um, I think one of the things that I really wanted to bring up, because we've obviously been talking about Elijah so far as well, but um I was really happy when Mickey said Pac-Man, right? Because of how like consume Elijah first was, and then how he changes from that, right? And how I think one of the main themes of Elijah, or like just Elijah as a person and his journey. Remember, this is only the first part of his journey. This is half of like the full like duology. I forget the name for that, but um, it's half of it. And for this half of the journey, one of the main things that Elijah just goes through is unlearning, right? Because he's gone to the point, as all human beings, we're born clean, this like pure, and then from there we get tainted, and we see Elijah get tainted, but from there his like his entire spiritual journey is just unlearning the things that he had been accustomed to find normal, to find regular, right? And in that unlearning he found so much peace. For instance, the Pac-Man is a great example. Elijah, which I thought was really funny for like the first bit of the book, was incredibly like consumeristic, like your typical capitalist, like ready to go get make 6 7 figures, get a good office job, all the things. He was ready and he was nurtured to become like that as well. And because that's how his mindset was wired so well, it's also why we see a lot of his interactions with nature were obviously consumeristic and very dismissive of others. And I think a lot of the times our culture specifically is like exactly like this. It is Elijah, right? We are all like Elijah. The same way that we always go about things as from the perspective of what can I gain out of this? And one of the main parts of the book that I find so beautiful is how he goes from what can I gain from to what can I give? And that journey of learning that like how he was trained to go obviously from all his Coptic parents as well, right? His it's immigrant parents will always push you to do the best, and they want the best for you, which is also why you'll see that. But on learning that so that he's able to unlock what's truly good for him, what will truly give him joy, what will truly fulfill him besides outside of like the consumeristic aspect of things, he will only find that true peace in Christ. And we see that consistently. And we see that as he gradually unlearns the bad habits and the bad mindsets that he was imposed, like in the world, that he had imposed upon him in the world, like his being, his like humanness or his Adamness is like true. I guess his being is like a reflection of the image of the creator. That just like grows so much more. And I think that's a really beautiful part of the journey. Anyone want to add?
I can share a little bit of this as well. I think with Elijah, like I said before, I found a lot of parallel between like his past self where he was in the midst of like, not really religious, not really like like not really Christian anymore basically. Um to where I mean he was talking about like how he was the king of himself and that no one could stand in his way, and there was just like Heron said, like very consumerism, very go go go, like very I'm the king of my life, things like that. um and then and then he went back to like basically I need you, Lord, like you are my king, you are my Lord, and declaring that like he is literally nothing without the Lord. And I feel like I related so much, especially in terms of like my spiritual life. I think there was a time in my life where, like I, not necessarily I was completely like not a Christian anymore, but it was like I was questioning a lot of things. And I think that's like a reality for a lot of youth these days, especially when we're living in the Western world where not not a lot of things are very spiritual and reminding us of like our spiritual lives. And I felt like that a lot of that parallel I saw in myself, and I I really like that. Like I felt like I saw myself in that, and that I could find my way, I could always find my way back to the Lord, and that ultimately nothing is going to satisfy us, and nothing is going to satisfy me without Him in my life, no matter how much consumption, no matter how much like worldly success that we have, that He was chasing. Like, He was chasing to be like all this, like He was chasing His degree in His college life and everything like that. So like no matter how much of that we have, like reminding us that we are basically nothing without the Lord. I think I saw a lot of that parallel with myself, and like my spiritual journey. So I think that's why Elijah was my favorite. Like especially towards the end where he was like in a spiritual way, like n like nowhere near where I am right now. So it's like I see myself in like the path, but like so this like your future, like kind of, like it kind of like I don't know, I guess sets a path for me in a way. So that's what I liked about it.
I would say that for me, the characterization of Elijah that comes to mind is literally transfiguration. Like you follow him through this journey of just learning about the Lord and building this relationship with him, and it's just so beautiful that it's all consuming practically. And it's like the paradigm, there's like a massive paradigm shift from where he's going, like you said, like very me, I'm the king of, like I'm the captain of my ship, like I am the one that determines and finalizes thing, going from that to the humility necessary to say, Lord, I need you, and being able to surrender to Christ. Like that was such a beautiful thing to just read about and like envision. And it very much, at least for me, this is like the book that really helped me understand the importance of like understanding your place in God's will. Because bad things happen to Elijah, good things happen to Elijah, but all of it is used to get him to where God needs him to be, right? He gets near the end, like you see him be in particular situations and like helping people and even uplifting them and getting them to where they need to be. Meanwhile, in the beginning of the book, like he's very much not that person yet. And he suffers a lot through the book before he gets to that point. And it's like it also it makes you reflect and be like, oh my gosh, like what are things in my life that I saw as being terrible that now have essentially brought me to be the person I am now, and where is God taking me? Like if you are in a moment of crisis right now where you're struggling with your faith or you're struggling secularly and you don't know what to do, like you don't know what God's plan is. If you surrender to him, like if you give everything to him, he will take you to a better place. And you see that very clearly in this book. And in my mind, I've associated Elijah's journey with submission to God's will. So, yeah.
Yeah, a lot has been said about Elijah. I don't think I have much to add. Just that he's probably the most relatable character in the book, and um, just it was just really beautiful following him along the journey of like his inner thoughts, his struggles, and his search for like meaning and purpose, which basically ultimately leads him right back to his source, which is God. And there's also another character that's worth mentioning, which is Esther. Um, she's probably one of the least relatable characters, at least for me, I'd say. But she is like literally the prototype of like what a Christian should be, especially as a woman. She's basically like Mother Mary being a prototype of what a Christian should be. And I love that the fact that, like, we read stories of saints, and then we're like, oh, they're probably from the past. It was better days in the past. There was no internet in the past. There was lots of there isn't much destruction. There's a lot of things we tell ourselves as we read stories of saints, either from Bible or Saint Exarium or anywhere else. And I love the fact that Esther is a very contemporary person. She is in the Western world. She's pursuing her career. She lives in the hustling and bustling of downtown Ottawa, like in Canada, literally. And so she basically kind of keeps us accountable when we try to give these reasons for ourselves not to be spiritually strong. She's like, really? I have the same struggles too. I'm living in the same era, so you could still be the best version of yourself that God wants you to be, and that's why what I love the most about Esther, I'd say. But also, uh, I love. I feel like it's very I love how it's very relatable how Esther ended up the way she is and Elijah ended up the way he is. And like I've noticed how when the book narrates their stories, there's kind of a parallel between like their upbringings and like what kind of people their parents were, what kind of upbringing they were in, what kind of environment they put themselves in. And you also see how their personality also plays a role. It's not just their upbringing. There were places where Elijah could have said, "No, I believe in this," but he falls prey for the Me Too movement, like Maklit mentioned. While we see Esther stand her ground, and she's very unapologetically herself in the face of like judgments or basically in finding herself in a place that's different from her. And we see her have a very set boundaries of, oh, there's a limit for me to conform to this new culture and to this new place, but there are things I cannot compromise in order to fit in. So we see and a beautiful interplay between nature versus nurture thing when we see these two, but it also tells us like a lot about how immigrant parents are, especially people from like traditional upbringings and like from these traditional from this old religious traditions, and in their attempt to instill those in their children, in those we see the different results and how they go about trying to instill these values in their children. And so we see how the difference in result between Esther and Elijah when we see those things. And I found that to be very interesting to note as well. So yeah, I really loved the contrast and the both the divergence and convergence of the stories of Esther and Elijah throughout the book. So yeah.
Absolutely. I think I'm glad we moved on to especially the parent side of things because when it comes to Esther's parents and Elijah's parents, one thing that I really noticed with Elijah's parents that I found like super interesting was like especially how they were characterized. It's like copy paste the majority of like religious immigrant parents. And when there's a part of the book that I find absolutely hilarious, and it's where Elijah's mother is essentially praying for something or giving thanks to God for something that where Elijah is not necessarily going about things in the way that the will of God would have necessarily had him go, but she sees it from the worldly perspective as we all do a lot of the time, and she tells God, she goes, "Thank God, thank God that this is happening. He's normal." And this quote, like immediately, it opened my eyes. I thought it was really, really funny. And it goes, she goes, "Thank God, thank the heavens," and it goes,
I wish
"Heaven
you
was
could mention that. I don't think it's a big spoiler. I think it would be good for giggles why
the
she was
story."
thankful. No, what
Well,
she was thankful for.
oh, so Elijah was. This is the first time where Elijah's kind of like entering a bit more worldly things, and essentially Elijah developed a crush on a girl, and she noticed him acting weird, acting different from his like innocent, pure self, and she went, "Oh, what's wrong with him? Whatever." But then she realized, "Oh, he's a crush." And for the longest, she didn't think he was normal. She didn't think he was like the other boys. She didn't think, oh, is he going to develop a crush? Is he going to get married? This is something that worries a lot of mothers, obviously, and, understandably so. But instead of thinking, and a lot of our parents would never go like, oh, monasticism. No, that's just not something that comes to most parents' minds. And they wouldn't necessarily, like, most parents wouldn't want their child to go into it as well. And I'll go into that a little bit later. But and she goes, thank God for this. He thanks him that that Elijah's not a budding monastic. It says heaven was quite unsure how to respond. Because how do you respond to that? How do you respond to a parent who's, kind of quite thankful that their child isn't going to maybe like the harder, the more like ascetic like aspect of like, oh, he's normal, he's worldly. There's things in the world that are for him, and it's genuinely something. And it was an honest prayer. You can see throughout the book his mother's an honest woman and a genuine woman, but even in that prayer alone, there's so many problems, and I think it like reminds me of how many oftentimes our parents and us ourselves, the worldly thing comes first in our prayers, always, right? And I think the book does a really beautiful humorous way. It kind of rebukes us for that because the priority, especially in parenting, and I'm saying this not as a parent, but especially in parenting and everything always should be the spiritual life, right? And we see with George and Sally, they get quite upset when Elijah kind of strays from the spiritual path, and their characters like they're obviously good people and they want the best for him, but in the same way that they get upset when he goes into the spiritual path, we see in his childhood though that they wouldn't necessarily want him to go all the way in the spiritual path, even if that was where he was meant to be, right? Like with monasticism, right? And I think this is so wildly relatable to, like the modern immigrant Orthodox parent and how they would interact with their children, with just the youth. They want them to be, churchy, but not too churchy, or religious, spiritual, not too much, not to the point where it could, possibly infringe on any part of your worldly future. Not that, God forbid, right? And it's really, really, really ironic, and it is, I think, in my opinion, quite cautionary, right? It gives kind of like this is a stop sign. This is one of the things where you have to look for, and it teaches us, because of how iffy and not as strong in the faith as that George and Sally were, not as they weren't as I guess they didn't try and pass it on with all the love and care. That was not their first priority with Elijah, and because of that, because of their misunderstanding of what life is really for, I guess, he kind of strayed on an opposite path. And circling back to Esther, one of the things that I thought was really beautiful, like you said, with the parallel between Elijah and Esther, is how similar they were in childhood. Is I think, and obviously I think the author did this purposely. It shows where like Elijah went one path, Esther went another, and a lot of the characters in the book have go through this, like it's a kind of a similar thing. It shows both Esther and Elijah were like cradle Christians, but it shows the two paths a cradle Christian could go into, right? And then there are other characters in the book that weren't Christians at all from birth, and it shows their journey as well. And I think the beautiful part of all of that, though, as difficult as it is for Elijah to go through that other path while Esther went through, stayed on the good path, is that all of these characters at the end of the day, or not all, but like these important spiritual characters that we're introduced to, all of them circle back to the same ending, which is Christ, right? Elijah, even though he strays, he comes back. And his journey is quite similar to, the majority of us. Esther, though she may be in the minority, there are people like her in the world who stayed on the good path at all times. And then there are also other characters who wouldn't, maybe were never introduced to it in the young age, like a lot of us are so privileged to be. But they find Christ in their own way as well. And I think it's like a beautiful, I guess I get that, like icon or like a reflection of the real world, and how people, regardless of how different their journeys, have infinite different possibilities and ways of circling back to the Creator and to the love of Christ. Um,
Yeah, I mean, while we're on the topic of important characters, I feel like I have to mention Abu Namina, who is basically he is Elijah's spiritual father, and the time he spends with Abu Namina has a major impact on his journey and where he goes and continues on deeper into his spirituality. And you see, t like, as time goes on, he continually goes back to what Abu Namina has had told him, and the lessons he taught, I mean, the lessons he learned by the different, um, um, I guess not activities, I guess you would say. I don't want to give away too much, but like the different activities and outside of just prayer and obviously like devoted time with like silence, reading the Agbeya, which is like the Coptic prayer book and stuff like that. Outside of just that, even like the different activities that they would do together in silence, in contemplation, in reflection, how that really made a massive impact on Elijah's life. And as he goes on to his journey, he always goes back to that time with Abu Namina and all the things he learned from him. And it just really highlights the importance of having a spiritual father and a spiritual guide who can just teach you like the humility necessary, the meekness, the just the compassion and all the good virtues of a Christian livelihood. And it really reminds you of like at least in the setting of all of us of being Cassuels Nisalijuch, like how grateful we are, how blessed we are to have such a great father who's we can turn to for guidance. And it really shows you how big of a difference it can make, having that guide and not having that guide, right? Because you see that in Elijah's early journey and then later on in afterwards in his later journey.
Definitely. Yeah, I think this is all so beautiful. I will say, just remember, guys, there's a lot that we're not covering, like beyond what you can even imagine. There's a lot that we're not going to talk about, just because we want you to go and read it for yourselves. But we're gonna do a quick 1 minute spiel each on why we think you should read this book, because I think it's a really important one, especially for the youth. Um, yeah, does anyone want to start? Or I could start. Is that, yeah, consensus? Cool, great. Um, okay, so 1 minute on the clock, go. I think this book is incredibly beautiful. I think it's really, 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 really like important in the time and in the age that we are now, especially the book after this one as well. The second book of this, really, really, really just potent visuals that really remind you of the time that we live in, and like the importance of having something that kind of draws you back in outside of just like the real world, what you see in the real world, seeing like the, I guess, a correct spiritual journey or a like a fruitful spiritual journey in a time and age that is similar to the one like that is set in like our world now is super important. A lot of the time when we go back, we read the works of the saints or the lives of the saints, it is often like from a couple centuries back. And we immediately go into like this cynical mindset of like, yeah, that was back then, right? Like what I always said, it is not now. But I think even as fictional this book, maybe it is quite realistic. And seeing that it is possible, right? That seeking Christ and finding Him, it is possible, and growing to these like spiritual heights. Not only is it possible, it's required. It's what we need. Um, and having a book like that at a time like this with a diaspora that we have, I think is such a blessing and one that I think everyone should take advantage of. All right, I'm gonna call on who's next, just for going dead silent on me. Why don't I go?
Knew you'd say that. Okay. I'll just say like if you're like an inquirer like of the faith, like why orthodoxy? Like why what's the big deal with the Eucharist? Like why are saints a big deal? Even from an Orthodox as someone from Orthodox upbringing or someone from an outsider, that's an outsider, I think I would say this book is a very good place to start. Um, because like I think sometimes literature is a very powerful tool. It's definitely not just literally a place to start, I'd say. But like, seeing like Heran said, seeing people, seeing the characters develop these relationships with the saints, seeing the characters going through these journeys, seeing how having spiritual guide and being able to partake to the in the sacraments, seeing how it helps them and seeing how very relatable and contemporary they are, I think would create in us like an eagerness to have or share those same experiences and have like that sense of like that joy and peace and ease that we see these characters experience along the way. And I think it would be a very good motivator to seek further, I would say. And also, if you're a kind of person who is an Orthodox, but if you're maybe want to strengthen your relationship with God a little bit, be more spiritual, but you find joining a Sunday school or approaching a priest or opening the Bible a little intimidating, then I think this book is definitely also for you. Because I think, like I said, it starts out very smooth, very casual, very relatable, and it goes very, very deep. Like I'm telling you, like sometimes even like could be even theological and like some parts of it feels like it's the andamta of the Bible, the interpretation of the Bible. So you find yourself getting very deep before you even know it. So I think this is a less intimidating and more hooking start to get to know more, I would say. And if you were raised in the church, go to Sunday school, but don't feel the connection either due to like cultural barriers, language barriers, or I don't know, judgmental comments, anything like that. This is also the book for you because you'll see the characters navigating the exact same emotions that you're going through. And it would also give you the practical steps, solutions and steps to get out of it and come closer to God, as you follow the storyline of these characters. So, um, literally, I would just recommend this book to every breathing human being. And I'm not even kidding. So, yeah.
Okay, I can go next. So, why I think I would suggest this book to literally everyone I know and everyone to ever see this, is, well, I talked about this again in this exact same podcast like right now, but like it's the relatability of like Elijah's whole entire journey. But I think something else I think I've also mentioned pa in the past episode before is like how sometimes in some like advice that people give you, it's like, okay, be this, be that, like you have to be this, you have to be that, but then you're like, okay, so like how now? Like how do I do that, you know? And I feel like this book puts that in a way that I've personally never read in another book, where maybe in another book I'd be like, okay, you have to do this in like steps. But this is like you're literally seeing a reflection of yourself in different characters. And I think like the beautiful part about it is like you don't have to relate to a specific character fully. Like it's like I relate to Elijah in this way and I relate to Esther, not Esther. I don't relate to her, but like other characters. Like for example, one of my other favorite, one of my, one of my other favorite characters were Rita. Like I related to some parts of her and like didn't relate to some other parts of her. So it was like seeing your reflection in this other person throughout their lives and throughout their journey into their own way of discovering God or rediscovering God or whatever it is, like whatever journey that you're on currently. Right. And I feel like that in itself is like, you know, like kind of leading you into the like wherever you are on the path right now, kind of showing you a way into where you can go about your spiritual life, especially like Mara might said, if you are kind of intimidated, you want to get started, you want to do, you want to find a priest, you want to do this, you want to do that, but you don't know exactly where to go. Instead of reading like a bunch, I guess, steps, like if you were to read this and see yourself in these characters, it would kind of guide you into the way you should. So I think that's why I would recommend it.
Yeah. I would recommend this book because at least for me, I found myself um like very deeply touched by this book. um, you basically find yourself on the journey with Elijah. And at least for me, like I didn't even realize it. Like at first I was like, okay, what is this guy doing? Because early on you're like, is like what is happening? Like, because at least the way I expected this book to be, I was like, okay, so it's about an Oriental Orthodox priest, right? Like I was going into it like the mindset of like, okay, this is a holy man. I'm basically reading like a realistic fiction story about a saint. Like I thought we were just gonna get to it. Like I didn't expect to like learn about his upbringing and all that. And I was like, wow, like it really eases you into it. And then you get to the deep end, it's like, oh wow. And at least for me, like it genuinely changed so much of my perspective on Christianity, and just what it means to be Orthodox, especially. And if you are looking for something to give you conviction and just lead you to a deeper wisdom than just like obviously we have so many wonderful church writings, theological and all that. If you're looking for like deep spiritual wisdom in the sense of like on like wisdom you can utilize for when you're on your own spiritual journey, I would highly recommend this book. There are so many quotes that I go back to and just remind me, like, just ground me. And because it's like, one of the things that I love about it is that each chapter, you can see how it's linked to the Bible book that it's titled after, right? So, like Genesis, you can see how it's about, like, you can kind of relate to Genesis and Psalms and Job and all that stuff. All those chapters, you can see how it's linked to the Bible, and it's like, wow, like this is deep. Like this is not just theology. This is real spiritual meaning, and it's just relatable. Like you find yourself relating with Elijah so much that you genuinely are on this journey, and that's why I would recommend this book.
Okay, I think that was so beautiful. And now we're gonna jump into a couple of, just Q&A discussion prompts. I'm gonna ask you guys a couple questions. The first question is, what is your favorite quote from the book, and obviously why? I'll start because my answer is really short. I don't have one, and it's not because I mean, obviously, it's not because I don't scratch through this book, but there's so many parts of the book, not necessarily quotes, but like parallels from one end to another that like mean so much more to me and had gave me so much more revelation than a specific quote did. So I think I love this book a little too much to have a favorite quote in the first place. But I'm gonna let you guys take it away.
I can also say, oh, never mind. Sorry.
No, but please go ahead. I just spoke, so I felt bad. Like, no, just go ahead.
I also actually don't have a favorite quote like Hiran, but I will say something I like a part of a book that is like that touched me personally, especially since now, it's like Kenna season, you feel me? Like it's Christmas when I'm in. So towards the end of the book, where Elijah was struggling with subduing his desires, right? Like we have a lot of these desires, a lot of like complaining and frustration at things when we're not at comfort, or the comfort we desire is not there, whether that's with like our work or anything like that. And he basically talked about how like the humbleness of Christ when he came, and even when he was born, like he could have been born in like a big kingdom and like as a king and things like that, but he didn't do that. He came and he was born in a manger, and just that humbleness, like that is the Lord himself, right? Like Christ himself was born in a manger where they didn't even have like warmth, so like the animals in the farm had to give him warmth from their breath, right? Like that's how humbly he came, and him realizing that and being like, oh my gosh, like I'm like all my desires for comfort and all things, like I'm just a human being, but all of these things that I desire are nothing. Um, Especially because Christ himself, like even he didn't complain when he was born in a manger as God himself. So I think that was one of my favorite parts, especially because Genna is my favorite holiday. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a really, really like impactful part. Like just seeing Christ's humility is so beautiful, and the way it's portrayed, it's also like very much one of the major themes of at least Water. I feel like it focuses on Christ's humility and just humility in general, and I love that as well. But I would say my favorite quote is it's like during when Elijah is really like turning to nature and like really learning about the sacredness of nature. And the man he meets and takes him through this journey says this to him, explaining what it means to be earth, right? So he says, Elijah, the first step in becoming earth is just that, to recognize your createdness. You are a creature just like any other creature in this world. Don't forget that you came from dust and to dust you will return. And I love this quote so much. And obviously, like it's quoting the Bible itself because when during man's fall from grace, uh, the Lord tells Adam, you are created from dust and to dust you shall return, right? And it's basically telling, like, it's showing that we must be humble, right? One of the main features of earth is that it's beneath everything, right? And just watching, like, just reading his journey and like really understanding, like, humility is necessary in everything. Like, if you truly want to know Christ, you must start with humility, right? Because, like Mekhi said, like, he showed us what true humility is. Like, the God of the universe, the King of the entire world, right? The creator of all creation came down from his throne in heaven and laid in a manger. He was crying, he was cold. In as a child, like as an infant, he was born and he went through all the trials and tribulations that we do on this earth and just for our sake, right? And it's such an impactful quote, right? It shows you that humility is necessary in everything.
Mine, probably had two, and I told all of them, both of them, and I said I don't know which one I'll choose depending on the moment. I guess you'll see. But I decided to stick to one prayer that one powerful prayer that Elijah says, of course, around the end of the book, after all of that transformation that he went through. He says, Lord, open my eyes to see everything with the love that you have for it. And I have that highlighted and like I return to this single sentence, like I find myself returning to this single sentence a whole lot more because it's just so beautiful, like to understand the belovedness of everything in nature and like the biggest love comes from God Himself. And He is saying, like, let me see it through your lens. Let me see your creation through your lens. That way I will understand how valued it is, how loved it is, and I will treat it as such. And you see this one single sentence, this prayer transforming him um, throughout the rest of the second book and also the third book, Belovedness. And I think this is so profound. It even goes on saying like he keeps on saying like whatever he sets his eyes on, he keeps on saying this prayer. Like he even at some point legit says it to a sign that he sees on the road, and his heart starts flooding with love for this sign, and he's like, okay, it's official. I'm crazy, but it says like it's not just about that single sign he saw. Like through that sign, he saw the metal that was taken out of the earth, and how beautiful the nature of that metal is. He saw the people taking it out of the earth, and how like with love they did their work, and he saw the people planting that sign there, and you see it has like a kind of how a rippling effect of like how you have this greater appreciation for everything, every walker, passerby, every part of nature, and that changes you and changes people around you, transforms people around you through you, and we definitely see that toward in the second and third book. We see how just a single encounter with Elijah transforms people in their lives, and we see love is the most powerful force in this earth, and we see um, how beautiful it is when we love people um, in the way the creator does, and that was like very beautiful to read and very profound, and it stayed with me, so I wanted to share it.
Yeah, I absolutely love all those answers. You guys are so poetic. So I love that. And we're gonna do one last question. So which of the books, which of the chapters, named after the biblical books, resonated the most with you? Um, I think I'll start again. That's fine. So there's a lot of them that I really, really, really love. So this is quite a hard pick for me. But in the chapter called Ezekiel, which is like obviously a parallel to like the book of Ezekiel, where Ezekiel the prophet has visions of God on his throne, carried by the cherubs. Um, they go through Elijah goes through essentially a liturgy, right? He experiences a liturgy for kind of like in its like fullness for the first time since his I guess reform or his the beginning of his transfiguration and his like the changing of his soul. And I found it like the entire way that it walks you through. It is the Coptic liturgy, but it has incredible parallels with ours, right? And the way that it walks you through the liturgy, and it walks you through every emotion, every change of heart, every reflection that Elijah has from how he used to see the liturgy back when his heart was hardened to how he now sees it. I think it's just like an incredible like I guess reflection of how we, like as we grow in our spiritual life, started really, really appreciate and understand the liturgy more and more and more. How all the little sayings, how all the little parts, all the zema start to like really pull our heartstrings much more, and we start to the further that we get in our spiritual lives, we start to see that veil tear a bit more and more and more every Sunday, every Kadasi that we go to. It becomes even more clear just how close heaven is and how really we are like partaking in the services of like the kingdom really. While the liturgy is going on. And I think the way that he saw it really opened my eyes as well when I first read it. And I think it meant a lot to me. So I loved it. We can start with Hannah this time.
So my favorite chapter was Obadiah, and that chapter is essentially about descent. And it draws a lot of parallels with like the theme of Zoharada and during Abisom, right? The first week of Abisom, we basically learn about Christ's descent and his humility and just what he sacrificed for us. And it follows Elijah and a couple of other characters as they also um, not descent in the same way as Christ, obviously, but their descent into humility, right, and making themselves the lowest and just bringing themselves into their place in a way. And the way it's written is so beautiful. And if you compare it to the book of Obadiah as well, it draws so many parallels, and I think it's just so well written. And I love that chapter. It really spoke to me. If you can't tell, I really am big on humility. It's just it's such a major part of Christianity. and we obviously like one of the major fruits of the Spirit. And with humility, so many of the other fruits follow as well. So yeah, I love humility. Of course, I'm still working on my humility, but this book has very much opened my eyes on what humility really is, and um, how you can really achieve the furthest descent into humility.
Okay, I can go next with my favorite part. So I think honestly this is hard. Like I feel like throughout the whole book, I feel like there was a lot of things that spoke to me, but for now I think I'm gonna choose Baruch because I think um throughout this chapter specifically, it was Abu Namina giving him basically advice on how um like sin, death, and corruption all corrupts us, and how we find repentance and how we find um, mercy himself. Like he talks about how God is not just merciful, he is mercy himself, right? So, and he talks about like the seven passions, and also carrying your cross. Like I feel like a lot of times, we're always told like to carry our cross and things like that, but what does it really mean to carry your cross? What does it mean to deny yourself? Where do we carry our cross to? Things like that. So I feel like it was a very reflective book in terms of where we are spiritually, how sin corrupts us, like really just examining ourselves on how that affects us. But also like diving deep into like the Lord's mercy, and how we find that, how we going back to like one of the other books that I'm reading right now, All That I Have Is Yours, like receiving God's love. Like that's one of the things we struggle with, is like understanding his love and understanding his mercy and receiving that. So I feel like that was very reflective, and like the spiritual journey that I'm in right now. So yeah.
All right, guys, those were. Oh, we have not finished. I am so
Yeah.
sorry. Go ahead,
Um,
Mona.
so mine is probably my favorite chapter is Psalms. It's one of the most, I would say, emotional chapters where we see raw emotions of like grief and basically also loss and a lot of very suffering and a lot of very raw emotions coming out. And I love the interplay between what Elijah was experiencing during that time and how the Book of Psalms was a great prayer to navigate through those emotions, and how he was able to make those prayers prayed by Saint King David from all those centuries back, and how he was able to feel those emotions and those feelings right now as if they were coming out of his own mouth. And I love the realizations he was having and the transformation the prayer was having in him. Like one of the biggest thing I learned from it is like not putting anybody else before God in our lives. Like a lot of time loss is a very hard thing for us to process, and a lot of people actually unfortunately turn to atheism because of loss. They're like, how could he deprive me of such a thing? How could he take a loved one away from me? Like gl glory be to him. But like most people just say, either he doesn't exist or he's a sadist. Because why would he do this to me? And I'm like, and I love how loss is basically seen from the perspective of from a spiritual perspective, and how everything is from him and everything goes back to him. What's really important is not putting anyone else or anything else above God, and that like there's a void in us that only he can fill. And when we try to fill that with with other things, even seemingly good things, like with the love we have or we receive from other people in our lives. Um, that's the real problem that arises. And I love how the character was processing all these raw emotions from the perspective of the same emotions processed by King David, and how he was able to, through this prayer, get through this period of loss and grief, and how that brought him closer to God in a way that he never was. And I feel like that was also a very pivotal point of Elijah's spiritual transformation. So I feel like that really spoke deeply to me.
So glad I didn't cut that off. Um, but those were beautiful reflections. Again, this is like maybe like 1% of the book that we've really talked about. We kind of went over more like general themes, aspects. Go read the book yourself. I promise you, you will not regret it, regardless of how you feel about this podcast so far. Just go read the book. You'll understand why we keep ranting about it. It is available on Amazon, Kindle, all the things. Um, and wherever I am, you can find it. Don't worry. Just come over. I got you. I'm sure they got you as well. So
It's also
yeah.
available on Audible. So if you are someone that loves listening to your books, but I do think it's just the first half. I think they only have Earth currently on Audible, but they are in
Mm.
the process of putting Water, Wind, and Earth, I mean, and Fire also on Audible. So, but if you like get hooked with the audio of the audiobook version of this, then Earth is like a breeze to get through because you're just like, what happens next? So,
Great, great hint right there. So we hope you guys enjoyed this. Glory be to God. We'll see you guys next time.